There won't be much reason to play Anthem for quite a while. I mean, we pretty much knew that, but what may surprise many though is it's not down to abandonment. It's actually because BioWare are said to be revamping it from the ground up. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another industry report. So, today's story all comes through Jason Schreier's latest report. Now, before we get into the article and what, we have to discuss there, I do want to mention veracity. Now, he has a history of accurately reporting on public BioWare information. Now, this does include detailed work on the development woes of Mass Effect Andromeda and Anthem. He also wrote a book on Inquisition's development, and this does, of course, suggest a high level of familiarity with BioWare. So, does that mean his coverage is going to be inherently positive towards BioWare? I mean, today's story is pretty much a positive one. Well, I actually don't think so. The lion's share of his BioWare reporting has, it's covered things that the studio would not really like to get out. This includes inter-studio conflict, information that does not paint management in a good light, and a lot more things along those lines. Now, yes, Jason often doubles down with those who he agrees with rather than trying to, say, build bridges on Twitter, and that's not productive, but I think it's mostly evident that his Twitter behavior is separate from the quality of his work. Indeed, in a world where so much game media is just fluffy, pandering nerd culture bullshit, he generally is one of the greater forces for journalism out there. So yes, his tweets are unproductive and a bit eye-roll, but his work's pretty solid, and that's why we're covering it. So, what's happening with Anthem? Well, we all know that the game's launch was a disaster. That was followed up by the abandonment of its roadmap, the delay of features, and most recently, the departure of Ben Irving and Chad Robertson, both key figures on the project. Now, through this time, EA and BioWare said that they remained committed to the game, but they were very sparse on the details. And this all happened amidst an information blackout as their social media went quiet for quite long stretches, especially over the summer. We, of course, know much about this game's development through Schreier's big expose, with the project initially having impressive tech demos and being quite hype, but BioWare not being able to pull it together into a good game. This led to years of wasted time that only really stopped when EA's Patrick Soderlund got a little bit more involved, which then directly led to the direction that was shown with their heavily scripted E3 reveal. Now, typical of a rushed game that lacked strong direction, it had poorly thought out systems, a lifeless story, and essentially no compelling long-term gameplay loop. It was clear to all, in my view, that that game needed to be reworked in its entirety, and from what we now understand, that revamp is actually underway at BioWare, but it's still in the early days. So, what follows is from Schreier's latest report. Now, this recent revamp, referred to internally as Anthem Next and Anthem 2.0, has been going for a decent amount of time. They say that the team initially took a few months to pause, to take stock of the game and to work out what it needed. Direction work, though, has taken place over the last few months. So, yes, I mean, it's only really, 6 months in overall. It's very early. Now, the internal names for this are interesting. I mean, to me, both of them feel like references to other games. No Man's Sky Next, that's the update that pretty much saved it, right? Next was the culmination of multiple updates that greatly expanded the scope of that game, fixing many of the core criticisms, and it was all released for free. Now, since then, Hello Games have released No Man's Sky Beyond, and while many still are skeptical towards that game, I mean, just visit the Steam page. 90% of recent reviews are positive, so obviously it's well received. Now, as for Anthem 2.0, that reminds me of Diablo 3's Loot 2.0 update. Now, Loot 2.0, that paved the way for Reaper of Souls, and it was the beginning of that game's redemption. Well, depending on who you ask. So what I mean by bringing this up is that BioWare staff's inspirations are clear when they say Anthem 2.0 and Anthem Next. So, what's actually being changed? Well, here's what Schreier's sources said. Mission structure, loot system, quest system, social systems, progression, world map, difficulty, and entire structure. Just a small update. Now, specifics are, of course, very sparse, with the focus actually of the article really being on how early it is, but for one example, they talked about the world. So right now, you load into a portion of one massive map, and when you do a mission, I mean, it's just an invisible wall gated part of that map. Now, they're considering splitting the world up into zones, and this would allow them to more easily modify parts of the game without having to worry about the impact of their changes cascading out to the rest of the game's world. Basically, it would let them iterate faster faster and do more unique things with individual zones. They also said they're looking at what a mission even is, and they're saying they might even ditch the mandatory return to Fort Tarsis between missions. They say that it feels like there's a disconnect with the game and that they want to fix that. And I mean, yeah, that's all vague, but I get the point. You've got a big open world game that, you can load into any portion of it, but you just do a terrible copy and paste mission only to be teleported back to your base, all while having far too many load screens. It feels like a slog, very different from the slick experience of, say, playing The Division 2 or Destiny 2, which both manage to offer a cohesive gameplay experience. Content's not the only thing that's up in the air, though. So too is the delivery method. Yeah, the studio is actually so early they don't even know how they're going to get these changes into players' hands. Right now, thoughts vary. So sources said that it could be a No Man's Sky-like set of updates, that it could be one massive update, or that it could be launched as a new game. But do note that Schreier noted that if it was released as a new game, they would be unlikely to charge full price for people who own Anthem. And being real, that latter option, I mean, that certainly would be risky. If they want to win people over, this whole thing should be for free. Either that, or they'd have to do a Diablo 3, put the new system in, like Loot 2.0, but then sell the expansion later. Now, as for development progress, well, Jason said that it ranges from dozens to hundreds of developers, but he's not really that specific, so I mean, it's a bit weird, though. He is clear that development is being shifted over to Austin. Now, apparently Austin and Edmonton, the two studios there, butted heads throughout Anthem's development, so this move will likely help them to produce a more unified game, because it is actually being led by that one studio. So that's basically our Anthem update. I mean, it's weird, right? We had the info blackouts, we had Ben Irving leaving, Chad Robertson leaving. Those things really did look quite grim. The entire time EA said they were committed to it, and they were still committing resources to the project, and based on these sources from Jason, it does seem like they are actually committing to that. And overall, I'd say that that probably is the commendable thing. It's a better thing to do. Now, a part of that could just be, they see the potential of having an entry into that sort of big loot shooter market, right? They probably want that. They probably know that, well, if you look at Anthem, the suits, people like those. The gameplay went over pretty decently. Some of the fantasy went over quite well with people, but, the world, the missions, the loot, the characters, the story were the things that really failed. So they probably see themselves just thinking right, we want a loot shooter, right? We want a game in that genre. We could make a new one again and have that be 6 years, or we can put maybe a year of development, a year and a half of development into making Anthem into a good game. And I really do think that is possible, because if you look at Anthem, I mean, the shooting is okay, the abilities are pretty cool, the flying is okay, but I think most people seem to have liked that stuff anyway. I'm a bit more harsh on it than most, I think. But there's the core of stuff there that's good, the arts, the world, those things. But they've just failed every single system. Now, thankfully for them, those systems will be the cheaper thing to develop, right? Because that's mostly just brain work in a way, right? It's just doing those things intelligently, implementing them right. So probably, if they still are committed to having an entry into that market, yeah, the cheapest thing they can do is just make Anthem good. Now, of course, I would say that it was very stupid to throw Anthem out so quickly into the market when it was evidently not going to be received well. I mean, apparently they knew they were going to have a little bit of an initial hit, but they just didn't think it would be as big as it was. But, I mean, frankly, anyone looking at that game reasonably should have known it was going to be a disaster pre-launch, and it's pretty shocking that EA still decided to march ahead with that game. So overall, it seems like they're doing the right thing. I think the financial case for continuing Anthem development makes sense in the context of them wanting an entry in that particular part of the market. So what would it actually take for me to go back to Anthem and to care? That's quite the question, isn't it? Because I just don't think that game at all was set up well from a loot perspective. The various types of loot were not fun. The builds were not fun. There were no effects the really cool effects you can get in Path of Exile or Diablo, or say the legendaries in Destiny. There was just none of that. So they need that stuff. Now, if you look at abilities, they kind of sucked. I mean, they were cool, right? Some of them were visually cool, but they kind of sucked. I mean, they weren't that interesting. There wasn't a large number of them. The combo system was a little bit arcane, and I don't think it was that great. So, I mean, they need to fix that. They need to do a lot of work on their combat system. Look at their enemies. I actually think that Mass Effect Andromeda had combat leagues better than Anthem. And the reason why is because of the more grounded scale of Mass Effect Andromeda, where, geometry mattered, enemy AI mattered a bit more. Being like rushed by a Krogan was... I think it was a bit more impactful than just fighting some random Dominion mooks who are just, a hitbox with a life bar that you reduce. They just need to work out how they can actually have a bit more causality in their combat loop and really just have it feel more varied. Like, the enemy design in that game is shockingly bad as compared to, say, Destiny, where if you take the Destiny enemies, any combination of them is going to feel pretty darn different when you're in a combat scenario. Take the Division 2. Even with the limitations of that game, they even do a pretty good job of that. Certainly a better one than Anthem, which is a bit crazy considering Division is just running around the streets with real world weapons as opposed to a big new fantasy universe. So yeah, overall for Anthem to be fixed, I would need a combat overhaul. I pretty much need a big story overhaul. The story of that game was just, it was pathetic for BioWare. So combat overhaul, story, loot needs a complete overhaul. Systems, like with progression and stuff like that, again, also need a complete overhaul. There's a lot to do. Basically, right, I think they need to take their core assets, the characters, things like that, and they just need to make a new game. I actually have a suspicion that they're not going to go anywhere near that far, and that we're instead going to get a pretty decent version of Anthem, but one that still isn't really going to hold a candle to other entries in that particular market. So there you go, that's my current thoughts on Anthem. I think they're doing the right thing, but I still think that there are fundamental issues with Anthem that they will have to overcome. I'd love to know what you think though. What would bring you back to Anthem? Do let me know in those comments down below. Thank you very much for watching this video, and with that, I will see you next time.